We're going to move on now to questions and answers. And been looking at all your questions, it's really quite interesting because we seem to get blocked into who is responsible, should we be using wound closure strips, what sorts of moisturisers should I be using, and then there was quite a little bit on talking about the health economics session as well, and people particularly interested in the Indigenous tool and whether or not it could be used across different Indigenous populations. So there's questions on every area, but I'm going to hand over to Ray, and Ray is going to moderate the Q&A session. So I don't know if members of ISTAP want to come on camera, and then Ray can direct his questions at yourselves. Thank you, Ray. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us wherever you are in the world. So lots of really interesting questions. I think over 60 questions answered so far. But as Karen has highlighted, we can basically incorporate them, I think, in several very broad categories. So there are a few questions that have been posted about the use of wound closure strips. So Emmy, if I come to you first, there are a few questions about whether it's appropriate or not to use wound closure strips. So would you want to pick that up for us, Emmy?
All right, thank you. I will do that. The reason we try not to, we do not advocate for the use of wound closure strips is the adhesiveness of the, I would not call it a dressing to start with, of the wound closure strips. And secondly, they do not have the dressing properties that would encourage primary wound healing, where you will want to have epithelialization, where you want moist wound healing and so forth. And lastly, it will not be able to protect the wound from further contamination, because that wound is to be prevented so that the skin tear does not get any infection beyond the date of the injury.
Thanks, Emmy. I don't know, Karen, if you wanted to add any more detail with regards to the use of wound closure strips?
Yeah, I think there was a really good, it was a comment rather than a question in the chat box about saying when patients have been in the ED and they've had a skin tear, the nurses, the medical staff will tend to use wound closure strips there. And I think that's really quite important to think about. We did some research down in the emergency departments and asked them, why do you use wound closure strips on skin tears? Because they just fall off anyway. You know, patient gets home, you change the dressing and it's bled so much, wound closure strips have fallen off, or it's really quite difficult to get them off. And then, because it actually makes us feel like we're doing something. We can sit, we can chat to the patient, we have a therapeutic relationship with them. And because we put all the wound closure strips on, it looks like we've been quite active in managing that wound, which is a really nice reason for doing it, because you sat chatting to the patient. Sadly, we shouldn't be using wound closure strips. And it doesn't seem sensible sometimes, because you want to close the flaps, you want to maintain it. But as people have said today, it's about reapproximating the flap if you can do, and then using a simple dressing that caught an atraumatic dressing that holds everything together. So it's just educating everybody, Ray, across all healthcare areas where people may present with a skin tear.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Karen. So we'll move on to a slightly different category of questions. Like I said, lots of really exciting questions. So this one is for Michelle and Bev. So there was lots of interest in the work that you did around adapting some of the ISTAP resources so they're culturally appropriate. So a few questions around, do you have any advice or guidance with regards to the care of people with dark skin tones, with regards to, for example, how you might assess infection of skin tears? And also, do you think that there is scope for the work that you've done to be adapted for other indigenous populations in other parts of the world, like South America or Australia, for example?
Yep, it's Bev. Thank you for that question. So for the tool itself, I would say absolutely. So when we were working on the wording, we took into consideration the wording was very, very important. And Kathy and Michelle, everyone else that's been involved with it can attest that we took our time and we went back and we kind of kind of did a panel where we were, really discussing the wording, and that was really important so that we could, have it used again across the world for any Indigenous population. Really, it was obviously focused on our Canadian Indigenous population, but the wording is not particular to any. So yes, it definitely could be used across the world. And as for what was the other question? Sorry.
So the other part was around the challenges of issues to do with infection in people with dark skin tones. So, for example, if someone's got a dark skin tone, how might you pick up the signs of infection, given that a lot of the more dated documents talk about looking for redness, which you can't see on dark skin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's for any wound, right? So, when you're looking for infection, you'd be looking for other signs. Is there heat? Is there more drainage? Is there more pain? So you'd have to look more at those other signs as well, not just for redness around it. Michelle, Kathy, anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, while this tool could be used around the world, I think it's really important to note that there are different cultural aspects that have to be considered. And so it isn't just one size fits all. Whatever group in another part of the world that wanted to look at this, they need to look at the process that was used for the adaptation and make sure that their cultural beliefs and values were worked into another version of the tool that would meet the needs of their people.
Yep. I
So,
see Michelle.
okay.
Sorry.
Do you want to come in, Michelle?
Did you
Hey,
have any?
everybody. Sorry, I'm in and out of clinic right now. I'm working frontline in it. But no, just yeah, like how Kathy had said, just to reinforce that. So our tool, we worked on it long to get the language correct. We worked on it because a lot of Indigenous worldview is, regardless of where you are in the world, it's relational, it's holistic, right? And just creating a tool that can be transferable. So yeah. So and yeah, I think too, if anybody wants to learn more about it and how to apply it to their practice, we're going to be doing some webinars and education on the tool itself soon. So that's coming up with Bev and I too, and Kevin soon.
So there are a couple of questions, like I said, it garners a lot of interest. So one question is, all the resources you've created, which are aimed towards First Nations people, will they be available, and when will they be available is the first part of it. Then the second one is a more scientific one, is in terms of the changes you made. Did you look at other measures beside inter-rater reliability?
Kathy, you can answer probably when it's going to be available.
Yeah, so the first version of the tool was available and submitted to Indigenous Services Canada March 31st. And since then, the group, they continue to receive input and feedback, and they have done one revision to the tool. And so that tool will be available by next week. And that will be available to be posted on the skintears.org website and the nswak.ca website. So it will be finished and available.
And then the
And yes,
second part was about the validation process.
Yeah, there's only been that first validation process to make sure that it is culturally acceptable and relevant to Indigenous people in Canada. There has been no other research done on this tool at this point in time.
Okay, no, so there's a call for more research, I'm guessing, Kathy,
Mhm.
for people to partner with yourselves to do more research. So really good questions. So on a slightly different track, lots of questions around the health economics presentation. So Vijay, if I come to you, there are a few questions around the choice of dressings in the health economics modeling and whether it was the same silicone dressings that were used for costing purposes.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. So maybe the Kim or the colleagues who were involved in the clinical trial, they would better answer the question. But in terms of like the costing the research use, so we have used the weighted average, so we know the quantity used, and to cost that, then we use the weighted average. But I don't know. I mean, what exactly precise type of the dressing used?
Karen, I don't know.
BJ, from what I recall, Kim and Kevin, who were the researchers, used the same type of silicone dressing on their patients throughout. So it was the same silicone dressing.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah,
Welcome.
Okay, and then an entirely different question. So if I come to you, Jenny, there are a few questions that were posted around the use of iodine-based dressings. So I don't know if you want to tackle that. Is it appropriate to use iodine-based dressings, and what impact might they have on a skin tear?
Thank you, Ray. Yes, so very commonly asked questions. I think the rationale for not using the inidine is that it can be very drying on the skin and the skin tear. And often it may not be necessary to use an antimicrobial such as inidine. And all of those assessment parameters need to be addressed, as Nicole was and others have been alluding to, and how you assess the skin tear using the ISTAP skin tear pathway. So unless it's absolutely necessary to use an antimicrobial, then just to use your atraumatic dressings, whether or not that's a silicon based dressing or contact layer. Sorry,
Thank
was
you.
there another part to the question?
No, it's a really comprehensive, it's a really comprehensive answer. But if I stay with you, Jenny, there are also a few questions around the use of silicone dressings. And one was, is there an increased risk of silicone sensitivity if silicone dressings become more widely used? So I don't know if you have an opinion on that one.
It's not been my experience to encounter people with a silicon sensitivity. There is, I think, some information within the literature that if silicon is used for an extended period of time, then a person may develop a sensitivity. But as I said, in my experience, I've not really ever encountered that, whether or not it's in regard to the management of a skin tear or other wounds. But certainly you would need to monitor the surrounding skin if there is any redness, forming a very clear delineated outline of the dressing that may indicate that there is a sensitivity developing, or wherever the silicon has come into contact, of course, with the wound or the skin. So that increased inflammation, the person may complain of increased pain. They may complain of irritation or itchiness underneath the dressing. So once again, careful removal, observation of the peri-wound skin, talking to the person, what are they able to tell you, may give you an indication that they are developing a sensitivity. And some people's skin are more sensitive than others, so that sensitivity may either be earlier or later.
Thanks, Jenny. That's fantastic. So, Jeannie, if I come to you, there's a comment and a question. So the comment was a lot of the guidance around skin tears seems to be focused on older adults. And is there any guidance or recommendations that are relevant to newborns and young people? For example, those with epidermolysis bullosa or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So any perspectives for people with fragile young skin?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. There is a lot of information regarding the management of skin tears in relation to neonates in particular, because it's an injury that, unfortunately does happen quite frequently, usually related to adhesives and certain devices. I think currently the literature is probably quite widespread. I don't think that there is, to the best of my knowledge, one good coherent sort of best practice guideline. You might know, Ray, of information that I'm not aware of, but I know certainly I have looked at this topic in quite a lot of detail, and the guidance would be very similar to the care of older people with skin tears. In fact, it more or less mirrors it. And I guess the same would be for any of the blistering conditions. I mean, we're still sort of going down the line of, protecting the skin with probably our silicone-based dressings or something that's very non-adhesive to prevent further trauma. So I would say that the guidelines are highly applicable, across all the generations and various conditions, Ray.
Thank you very much. So I have a couple of very quick questions for Kathy. So there's lots of interest in the session that you had with Richard. So just a couple of questions, I think, to conclude the question and answer session. So the first is, I guess, what sort of advice would you recommend that people give to family members who've got concerns about a relative or a loved one developing a skin tear?
I would definitely point them to the ISTAP skintears.org website, where they can get information and tools, and they can email. There is a phone number there. It just happened that I was available to take the call when Richard phoned. But I think it's really making sure that they know that there is a place to go to get current research and clinical information, that if they aren't satisfied that their loved one is getting as much help as required, that they could share this information with the facility, or at least make sure that the clinical people involved in the case do have access to that current information.
And then the second and final part, I guess, is what role do you think family members have to play with regards to skin tear prevention and treatment? And how can you support them in that role?
Family members play a critical role in preventing skin tears. Because family members aren't there all the time, it's really important that when they do visit, that they are looking at the surroundings that the patient is in and their physical environment, and making sure that that environment is safe, that if, for instance, Richard's mother, she was in a wheelchair, and she just was being moved in between doorways and in between the med cart, as he mentioned, and she did sustain a skin tear on her hand. So it's just really making sure that that environment is set up in an appropriate manner that will protect the person, and that they, maybe the patient can't grab something or move their hand and tear it on a sharp object. I also know that it's important, if someone else is bathing, whether it's a personal support worker or other caregiver, that they watch the length of fingernails and other things that could potentially rip the skin. So really creating that safe environment.
Thank you very much, Kathy. So unfortunately, I can see there's still a few unanswered questions. We'll have to stop there because we have to move on to the closing remarks. But what we'll do is we'll collate all the unanswered questions, and we will post the question and answers on the ISTAP website. And the final session is the closing remarks. But before we go to that, Karen, if I just come back to you, there's still a few questions around wound cleansing. You referred to guidance from the IWII. So if you just want to repeat where people can find that guidance on wound cleansing.
Yes, so the International Wound Infection Institute last year published therapeutic wound cleansing guidelines. They're free to download from either the International Wound Infection Institute's website or the Wounds International website. I have popped the link in the box, but I'll pop it in again now for anybody that hasn't maybe seen it and it's disappeared at the chat box somewhere. But they're all free to download.